It's time to fix recall knowledge in Pathfinder 2e. I have been game mastering the system for 2.5 years, and I'd say that recall knowledge is easily the most vexing part of the system to adjudicate at the table. Recall knowledge lets characters in the system recall something about a topic, very often about the abilities or strengths or weaknesses of a monster they encounter, and it is defined to be a single action. And for the trade-off of it costing you time during your turn, during an encounter, there are increased benefits to the action because of the way monsters and traps and other hazards are designed so that they have definite weaknesses and resistances and abilities that you can tailor your party strategy around. So overall, it's been an improvement. One of the many reasons why I like Pathfinder 2 as my preferred high fantasy tabletop RPG. But on the other hand, while it allows for a lot of discretion for the game master to decide what type of information to give and how difficult to make a certain check, which is not characteristic of much of Pathfinder 2e, it also, at the same time, like the rest of Pathfinder 2e, lays down some rails and rules that I think unnecessarily weaken the ability and also make it less predictable from table to table. So as a result, I've seen my players, after trying it out at first, use it less and less as time has gone by. And that goes against the way one of the design goals of Pathfinder 2e of trying to give you a lot of choices of how to use your 3 actions and trying to make them all viable so that you wish you had more actions and give you interesting choices during a combat. Recall knowledge usually is low on that list in my players' experience. So I'm going to try in this video to figure out why that is, look at some of the rules for recall knowledge, and try to fix those and share with you how I'm going to be running it at my tables. My name is Ronald, I am the rules lawyer. If you like this video, like and subscribe, it helps the algorithm, and also join the Discord community that's formed around my channel. And the link is in the description, and also support my Patreon. Before I go into my thoughts, I want to give thanks to a number of posters over at the paizo.com message boards, particularly Unicore, who made a thoughtful post about their issues with the recall knowledge action and asking the Paizo designers to use this summer's release of the Dark Archive book, which deals with occult knowledge and introduces some new classes and player options, for that book to be the opportunity to clarify things about recall knowledge and how to run it at our tables. And there were great comments by a number of people, including Captain Morgan, Scalifus, and NN959, that were really food for thought for me. Let's start with what recall knowledge is. It is a single action, and you attempt a skill check to try to remember a bit of knowledge regarding a topic related to that skill. The GM determines the DCs, the number you have to beat, for such checks and which skills apply. So it has the secret trait, which means that the GM rolls the die secretly, because look at our critical failure result. If they critically fail and get a result that's 10 or less than the DC, the GM is to give incorrect information or give a erroneous or misleading clue. If they succeed on the roll, they give a piece of accurate information or a helpful clue. If it's a success, they give accurate information or give a useful clue about their current situation. And if it's a critical success, they give additional information or context. That was under the skills chapter. Later in the book, under game mastering, it says more about recall knowledge. And it says that generally you want to use a simple DC to determine the difficulty of a recall knowledge check. On the other hand, if you are checking about a specific creature, trap, or other subject that has a level, you are to use the level-based DC. Then it says that a character who successfully identifies a creature learns one of its best-known attributes, be it a troll's regeneration ability, or a manticore's tail spikes. On a critical success, the character learns something more subtle, such as a type of damage that it has weakness to, or something that triggers one of its reactions. The book also says that if a character fails to recall knowledge about something, that further attempts will be fruitless. And if they succeed at recalling knowledge, further attempts to try to get more information about the topic will be increasingly difficult. So now I'm going to do a deep dive identifying several issues I have with how recall knowledge works, but one way to describe them collectively is as two broader issues. One of them was articulated very well by Unicore. They said, quote, "Right now there are major question marks that GMs have to resolve individually that can have massively swingy effects on the usefulness of whole builds. And the second issue is that these rules make players feel it is too weak to spend an action on." I'm also going to suggest house rules or best practices for GMs for how to deal with recall knowledge. And I want to preface that by saying that people who come from other RPG systems should not house rule Pathfinder 2e willy-nilly. There's a propensity to do that when other systems leave people feeling like they have to constantly fix it at the table to get the experience that they want and are used to house ruling. But Pathfinder 2e is a pretty solid system. You can pretty much trust it, especially an encounter building system. And these house rules and tips that I give to GMs in this video are after substantial experience, and they're one of the few house rules that I run. Okay, so the first problem here is with the first words. It says use a skill. So the first issue is that it's not very thematic. One does not have, let's say, a wizard who has knowledge in occultism, nature, and arcana and religion encounters a green hag. And that wizard does not have one part of their brain that only knows about occultism and another part of their brain that knows only about nature. And one could argue that both skills are useful in identifying the abilities or legends around a green hag. Society also might be a useful skill because of the legends that are often told and fairy tales having to do with hags. So what's more likely to happen in character is they see the creature and they recall all of their skills at once, their entire knowledge bank, to see if they know what creature it is and what it might be able to do. Now, in-game, the player, by rule, needs to choose a skill that they are using for this recall knowledge check. So let's imagine a game master presents the Bone Devil to the party, but they don't call it a Bone Devil. They say it's a skeletal flying creature that looks monstrous. And the players are likely going to conclude or assume that it's an undead creature because it's made entirely of bone. So the cleric, who not only is trained in religion but has decided to specialize in undead lore as one of their skills, says, I'm going to use undead lore to try to know more about this creature. By rule, because the creature is not undead, that character knows nothing about it. And we compound this with the fact that the GM is to roll recall knowledge secretly. So if the player hears that you don't know what this creature is, they don't know whether that's because it actually is an undead creature like they thought, but they rolled too low on their check, or that it's an entirely different creature altogether. And so they are then wondering to themselves, should I make another check using another one of my skills, given my first check didn't succeed? Maybe it's something else. It basically leaves the player feeling like they're groping around in the dark. And one possible solution is maybe the GM can know what that character's list of skills is and secretly roll a d20 and apply the best skill. Well, that seems like one way to go about it. They don't have to guess at which skill to use on this particular creature. But on the other hand, that would seem to preclude that same character being able to attempt recall knowledge again against that same creature using a specific skill? Well, the way I do it is I know in advance, before the session starts, all of the characters' skills and what their proficiencies are in them. And when, let's say, that wizard tries to identify the green hag, I know immediately that their best bonus, some combination of knowing what their best numerical bonus is and also which skill is probably most on point for this particular creature, I know which is the best skill for them to roll. Then I secretly roll it, and I then give them the result. The other part of how I run it is that after I do that, they are free to use any one of their skills and say, I specifically try to use a skill to try to recall knowledge about that creature or that topic. And no matter what the result of the first check is, I will allow them to do that subsequent check. So this solves the problem of them feeling bad because they guessed at the wrong skill or having no idea whether they guessed at the wrong skill. And it also still gives them the opportunity to make more attempts and not be foreclosed from trying to recall more about the creature or try to recall again. Also, if they choose the supposed wrong skill, then I still usually let them have a chance at it, but at a higher DC. So if they use undead lore in relation to that bone devil, I think that their studies into the undead might have included encountering a book saying, don't confuse bone devils with the undead. And so it's very plausible that that lore can tell them about this creature. This next example highlights several problems that I find in the recall knowledge rules as written. Let's say that a level 8 adventuring party is walking down a corridor, and an incorporeal creature appears by floating through one of the walls, turns towards the party, and casts a spell blasting cold and ice towards the party. The players want to identify this creature, and what this creature is a level 10 ghost mage casting Cone of Cold. However, as written, they are now being asked to roll a level-based DC for a level 10 creature, which is 27, which is pretty hard to get for a level 8 party. And when they succeed on that check, they learn the most well-known fact about that creature. And here, it's probably that it's incorporeal, or that it's a ghost that had something unresolved about their death, which bounds them to this world, and it will not be truly killed unless you can solve that problem. But for this party, they encountered level 4 ghost commoners earlier in their adventuring careers, and they already knew these things. However, this knowledge that they already knew is hidden behind a level 10 level-based DC. Now, this highlights one problem. First, problem number 2, the rule mechanic is conflating identify the creature and know its most well-known characteristics with the party trying to hone in on specific aspects of the creature. In the case of a party that already knows the most well-known aspects of, in this case, the ghost mage, recall knowledge and what it gives you by default is not very useful. So the party may instead be inclined to ask specific questions such as, oh, it's incorporeal, how do we bypass its ability to probably resist a lot of our damage against it? Or it floats through walls, is there a way we can make it stop floating through walls? However, the way the rules are is you are learning about that creature and that alone, and you are trying to identify that creature, and what you will learn is the most useful thing or the most well-known thing about that creature. And it takes some agency away from the players and puts them on this track where they're getting less useful information than they would like. Also, what they would really like to know probably is what types of damage it's weak to in order to damage it, given the fact that it's incorporeal, or maybe one of its weaker saving throws, whether it's fortitude, reflex, or will. But as written in the book, These are the more subtle things that are hidden behind a critical success on the roll. So again, this is a higher level creature than the party. They probably need to roll a natural 20 to get what they really want to learn about this creature. This also feeds into the perception that spellcasters are weak in this edition, because spellcasters, one of their strengths is the ability to target a weaker saving throw on a creature, or target one of its weaknesses to a specific kind of damage. Now, what's a solution? I think that players should be allowed to ask specific questions about a creature that they want to know more about, such as what weakness does it have, or how can we get past its resistance to all damage in the case of an incorporeal creature. Another problem here, problem number 3, is that the DCs are tied to that creature's level, and this is true for monsters as well as hazards. And in addition, if it is an uncommon thing, you are to add 2 to the DC, and if it is rare, you add 5. What this means is that higher level creatures, which are the ones players are going to want to use recall knowledge on, they're less concerned about finding the weaknesses of a weak creature, that those creatures are harder, generally very hard, to get useful information on under the rules. So what is a solution to these problems? The way I run it at my table is that the players, first they may try to do a general check about that creature and identifying it as part of what they'd learn, and I'd give them the most well-known fact about that creature. But they may want to ask more specific questions, and I think that identifying the creature should be given for free as part of a successful check to get an answer to their question. So in this case, the party that encounters the ghost mage wants to know how to bypass its incorporeal nature and how to do full damage against it. Well, I will do their check. Let's say that cleric does undead lore. Then when the GM resolves it, they are not bound by the level-based DC. The GM could use a simple DC, an expert check of 20, or in this case, because the Ghost Commoner, which has a similar trait, is level 4, use the level 4 DC. Meanwhile, actually identifying it as a high-level, level 10 Ghost Mage would have level-based DC, but I would resolve their single roll in comparison to both. If they get a 27 or higher, they know that it's a Ghost Mage. But if they get 20 or higher, they're going to learn useful information about how to attack an incorporeal creature. This is also more thematic because knowing what exactly a creature is will tend to be harder the more rare it is and the more high level it is. And those uncommon and rare tags would also be appropriate for knowing and thematic for identifying what it is. Problem number 4 is how the rules treat recalling knowledge about the same topic over and over again. As written, it says that when you attempt, let's say you succeed in recalling some knowledge about a topic. When you try to recall knowledge again, it will be adjusted to be a hard check. So you add 2 to the DC, then very hard, you add 5 to the DC, and then incredibly hard, you add 10. And this does not account for the possibility, let's say you were trying to learn about a creature that you're encountering. It doesn't account for the possibility that the players will be asking specific questions about that creature. Let's say they encounter a Hydra, a multi-headed legendary beast that when you cut off its head, it can grow 2 heads in its place. Well, upon seeing it, they might fail to identify it. However, they might later in the battle, after cutting off its head, recall, based on this new information, that actually it is a Hydra, and they might also recall that, if they think about it, how to deal with a creature that regrows its heads, what type of damage you want to apply to the stump. So the way the rules are written is that you're completely closed off on recalling knowledge again about the topic, in this case, the Hydra. But if we're allowing them to ask specific questions and not railroading the players to have to ask simply about the creature in front of them and only ask that question, then it allows for more repeat attempts. Also, we are not bound again by the level-based DC. Different questions that they ask about the creature can have different DCs. Maybe it's well known that that level 19 ancient red dragon breathes fire. That could be a low DC, or that it has a weakness to cold damage. That could be a low DC. But knowing that it has special reactions, special abilities, that it's particularly hot fire, has unexpected effects, that's going to be a higher DC. Allow them to make checks about the same quote-unquote topic or the same creature when in character it makes sense for them to do so. Maybe seeing them react to a fireball is a new occasion to recall knowledge about whether that creature is more physically hardy, has a high fortitude save, versus being nimble and light, having a high reflex save. Also, there isn't much need to prevent players from trying to recall knowledge again. Because in battle, and this is something that was said by Midnight Toker in the Paizo.com forum, it's understandable that you're not going to recall X fact while you're under duress in the middle of combat. Not allowing repeat knowledge checks after you failed makes sense out of combat. Otherwise, a character would just repeatedly roll something until they roll high enough. Now, in that instance, I think the GM should allow a player to re-roll about a topic if using a different skill and calling out a skill that they haven't tried on that topic before. Now, when it comes to inside combat, not only does repeating a failed check make sense because you may have been under duress before, but also in combat, you are observing that creature right in front of you, and recall knowledge can also be considered or reflavored as observing the target closely and drawing the appropriate conclusions from what you see. Problem number 5 is the critical failure rule, and here I'm in complete agreement with Derek of Knights of Last Call, in that I feel it's too punishing. What the rule is that if you critically fail on a check to recall knowledge, which is to get a roll in Pathfinder 2e that is 10 or more lower than the DC that you're trying to achieve, then the GM is to give you false information. Well, this succeeds at making an action that already feels weak into one that actively punishes you for trying it. And for higher level creatures and bosses who you are going to really want that information, that, what is the boss creature's weakness about, you are going to be punished. You're more likely to be punished for trying it against those very creatures you really want to use it against. And because the DC is higher and you're more likely to critically fail. This can feel really bad. Let's say that you are facing the boss of a volume of an adventure path and you are trying to find out what the weakest saving throw of a creature is, and you are told the exact opposite. You cast a spell, one of your highest level spell slots, against its strongest defense, and you whiff it, and it feels really bad. You have used up 3, maybe 4 actions, and you've wasted your time, and you were set up to waste your time because you tried to recall knowledge. And in a game that's trying to encourage players, which seems to be a design goal, to encourage players to think tactically, to punish them for making their characters think tactically is just seems counter to what they're trying to do. So what my solution is, I think there's 2 ways to deal with a critical failure. First, I think that you can give something that is obviously false, and it's kind of a moment to laugh at the table, so that they're not lured into trying something that wastes their time. I think that's one way to deal with it. And sometimes, yeah, if I feel it's not going to be too punishing, I will give a false piece of information that they may act on, but it won't be too punishing. Let's say, you don't think that troll has an attack of opportunity or some creature, and you walk up to it and it has an attack of opportunity. The benefit is that they know right away that their information is false, so that they don't waste very many actions acting on that information, and they still get some gain. In this case, they get closer to the creature. Another way to make critical failure less punishing is simply to adopt my rule of allowing repeat checks in combat of failed recall knowledge checks normally, but in the case of critical failure, not to allow repeat checks then. And that is how a number of other rules elements in Pathfinder 2e work as well. Problem number 6 is how these recall knowledge rules interact with core class features. And this is what was brought up by Unicore. There are some classes that rely heavily on their ability to find out information about creatures. One example is the Ranger, which can, at level 1, take a feat called Monster Hunter. Rangers have as a core class feature the ability to hunt prey, costs 1 action to hone in on a creature that they are hunting and get bonuses against it. What Monster Hunter does is, for free, let you recall knowledge about that creature for that same 1 action. It also says that if you critically succeed on this check, that you and your allies each get a +1 circumstance bonus on your next attack against that prey. By rule, if they fail their check against that creature, they don't get to attempt to recall knowledge about it again. Investigators get a similar feature where they get to recall knowledge for free as part of devising a stratagem against something they see. They also get a +1 to themselves and allies if they critically succeed. In my games, I've only seen critical successes on these checks happen sometimes, and given that the bonus is +1 to yourself and your allies, on the one hand, I usually emphasize every +1 matters and that they're more significant than people think. However, given the limited number of times you get a critical success on recall knowledge, that it does feel like it could use a boost. The Mastermind Rogue is another example. Every rogue racket gives you a new way, or a particularly powerful way, to impose the flat-footed condition on a creature, so you can get sneak attack damage against it. Well, for the Mastermind Rogue, which is intelligence-based, whenever you recall knowledge about a creature, that creature becomes flat-footed to you until the start of your next turn. Now, what are these things all doing thematically? You are keenly observing a creature or using your knowledge in some way where you see an opening to attack, and it's there for a moment, and it's temporary. And this is being combined with the same action of learning about a permanent trait about a creature. So what happens is that when you fail that recall knowledge check, sure, maybe you won't learn more about that topic again later when you recall knowledge again, but that shouldn't preclude you finding these temporary advantages. So we get this weird thematic disconnect where, let's say, that Mastermind Rogue tries to recall knowledge about a goblin that they see. They fail against that goblin, and then they see several more goblins come into the room. They would like to be able to recall knowledge about those new goblins that have come into the room. However, by rule, they've already recalled knowledge about that first goblin and failed, so they're not able to recall knowledge about the new goblins that have entered the room. And this becomes problematic if you are in a goblin adventure and dealing with many similar creatures. And this same problem becomes true for the ranger and for the investigator. So what's the solution? I think that for recalling knowledge about the goblin or the new goblins that ran into the room, we use the rules that I laid out before. If you have a specific question, the player has a specific question, they can ask that question, and I assign a DC appropriate to that question. However, when it comes to looking for these temporary weaknesses, I think that their level-based DC is appropriate for that. And furthermore, they can repeat that check in the future against the same creature. So it's going to be, so they're not precluded from trying to find these openings against, let's say, a high-level red dragon, but it's going to be a difficult check each time, which makes it work like other abilities, like striking that creature, casting a spell against that creature. You get to do it more than once, and the ability to do that is, your ability to do that is going to be shaped by its power compared to you. Now, a few miscellaneous issues about recall knowledge that I'd like to go over. One is that there's this great flavorful skill feat called Dubious Knowledge, where if you fail on your recall knowledge check, but you don't critically fail, the GM gives you one piece of accurate information and one piece of false information. First, this is a really funny feat, but it's also really challenging because you have to think of something true and also make up something. And the way I like to run recall knowledge checks is I like to say something that is in character for that character as the basis for what they think. Well, all of this is hugely hard to think on the fly, to think of something true and something false when you roll. And I've had this situation where I blurt out the right fact, and then I'm thinking at the table about what should I make up that is false. And it is completely a huge giveaway. So anyway, my only advice to this is to, when they have the dubious knowledge feat, to pause several seconds, even if they've succeeded on the roll, so you can think. And when you're thinking about a right and wrong answer, just pause those several seconds. It doesn't matter that you give something right away or not. You're not Matt Mercer. You can think about something that is true and something that sounds true but isn't. So there's that. My other piece of advice is another very useful piece of information players want to know is what level a creature is. There are spells in Pathfinder 2e that have the incapacitation trait, which are decidedly less effective against creatures that are higher level than double the spell's level. So a spell like Polymorph can be devastating against creatures up to a certain level. But if they are higher level than you or higher level than double the spell's level, it's going to be much weaker because they count their saving throw as 1 degree of success higher. So it is useful to know what level, relative level, a creature is. And I think it's completely valid for that to be a topic of a recall knowledge check. Okay, now to summarize. I am finding this a very difficult video to record because it's of the topic. The topic itself is quite amorphous in nature. I'm trying to draw lines in the sand about something that's amorphous, but here's a summary of how I would be running recall knowledge from now on. Okay, first, I'm not going to be using the rules for identifying creatures and hazards the way they are in the book. I think that when they recall knowledge about something, they have the option of recalling generally what do I know about this creature, and then you run it as written. But they might want to have a more specific piece of information, such as, I see that it's incorporeal, how do I damage it? Or this creature, is it nimble or does it have a weak mind? They can ask those kinds of questions. And so I would assign a DC using the simple DC chart as a guideline, and maybe a level-based DC, but it's going to be independent from the level of the creature to figure out how hard it is to know X piece of information. Then I roll. I also have handy the level-based DC of that creature, which is also modified by whether it's uncommon or rare. And that is the number they need to get in order to identify the creature or the thing. The other DC is to get the answer to their question. Also, I don't require them to define what skill they're using. At their first attempt at a question, I just look at my notes to see what their best skill that's appropriate to that piece of knowledge is. Then they're free to repeat checks, even if they've failed on them before. They may argue that they want to use a specific skill to know more about something. Let's say they encounter a wood golem, and after the GM has rolled a check using all of that player's skills, maybe the player will say, okay, I want to know how I can damage it given that it's wood, and I want to use my knowledge of being a woodworker on that. Now, the GM could treat this as a repeat check on the same topic, but with a lower DC, given that they've called out that skill, or consider it also a question about a specific topic and give it its own appropriate DC. In this case, the topic of the weaknesses of wood. I will adjust the DC or give a circumstance bonus behind the screen to improve your chances of getting it. Finally, if it's a character that is trying to get a temporary advantage against a creature that they're recalling knowledge about, I do not limit how many times they can try that on that creature, and they can try it on a new creature of the same type. However, succeeding on their ability requires succeeding on the level-based DC. Lastly, I think that checks that you are making in combat that you fail can be repeated because you are under duress at the time, just didn't know it in that moment, or you are also considered as just observing the creature and drawing the appropriate conclusions from what you see. Also, players should be able to make checks on things they observe in the combat, such as the Hydra regrowing its head over the course of a combat. So that's my video on recall knowledge. I hope people found it useful, and I'd love to know what you guys think about it, whether you use them in your games, whether you disagree with me and why. It's a constant community, me and my channel, and also the Discord channel, Discord server that I have, which you should all join. And maybe I'll have a new video if I turn out to be wrong. I plan to do more videos, including the next part in my series on alchemical items. I also am thinking of doing a video in the future about exploration mode in Pathfinder 2e, another area of the rule set that's kind of vague and leaves it open to the GM and could be run very differently at different tables and could use some clarity and best practices. So if you like the video, please like the video and subscribe to my channel and join my Discord and support my Patreon. Okay, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.